The cursor blinked on the screen, a steady, rhythmic pulse that seemed to match the thrum of blood in Leo's fingertips. He hovered over the button, the digital interface glowing with the promise of rapid wealth. His phone pinged on the desk, a bright notification banner cutting through the dim light of the study. It flashed 3 words: "Get rich overnight." The room felt silent, save for the hum of the cooling fan in his laptop. His finger twitched, millimeters from the click that would commit his savings to the volatile trend. He breathed in, the air smelling of old paper and dust. He thought of the lessons he had studied, the cold logic of long-term growth. The screen flickered, a sudden shift in the chart values creating a sharp spike of anxiety in his chest. He pulled his hand back as if the plastic were burning. He reached out and slammed the laptop lid shut, cutting off the light. The room plunged into shadows. Leo pushed his chair back, the legs scraping harshly against the hardwood floor. He ignored the phone, left it face down on the desk, and turned to the shelf behind him. He pulled down a heavy, leather-bound history book, opened it to the first page, and sat back down in the dark. The morning air was sharp and cold against his face. Leo walked down the sidewalk, his pace steady, his gaze fixed straight ahead. He reached the corner where the luxury dealership sat, its floor-to-ceiling windows reflecting the early sun. Inside, a row of sports cars gleamed, their metallic surfaces catching the light in a way designed to demand attention. Leo stopped. He looked at the reflection of his own vehicle parked a block away, its paint faded and its body showing the marks of years of service. He studied the contrast. The dealership offered a promise of immediate status, a quick transformation of identity through purchase. He stood there for a heartbeat, the silence of the street emphasizing the urge to step inside. Then, he turned his back on the glass. He walked past the dealership, his boots clicking rhythmically against the pavement. He reached the bus stop just as the engine rumbled around the corner. He climbed the steps, paid his fare, and found a seat by the window. He set his bag on his lap, feeling the weight of the lunch he had prepared the night before. The bus pulled away, leaving the dealership behind in the rearview mirror. He looked out at the passing city, his hands relaxed, his mind clear, fully committed to the path he had chosen. The office hummed with a different frequency that afternoon. It was a sharp, jagged noise of overlapping voices and frantic typing. A market dip had hit the boards, and the atmosphere in the room tightened like a spring. Across the floor, chairs swiveled constantly as colleagues stared at their screens, their faces illuminated by the red glow of falling numbers. One coworker stood up, his voice rising in panic as he tracked a plummeting stock. He paced the aisle, grabbing the shoulders of anyone who would listen. Leo sat at his desk, his own monitor displaying only a complex spreadsheet and a series of historical charts. He did not look at the ticker tape that ran along the bottom of the wall. When the coworker stopped by his desk, leaning in to whisper about the imminent crash, Leo did not even look up. He simply adjusted his glasses and tapped a key. Continuing his analysis, he felt the vibration of a phone buzzing incessantly on the neighboring desk, a rhythmic, desperate sound. Leo ignored it. He focused entirely on the project in front of him, tracking long-term variables that had nothing to do with the current frantic volatility. He kept his hands moving across the keyboard, steady and precise, while the rest of the room spiraled into noise. The cafeteria was crowded, the air heavy with the smell of reheated coffee and strained conversation. Leo sat at a small corner table, a sandwich unwrapped before him, when his friend pulled out the chair opposite. The man leaned in, his eyes wide and restless, tapping his phone screen against the tabletop. He spoke in rapid, hushed tones about a high-risk scheme he had found, a way to double their capital in less than a week if they acted immediately. He gestured toward the screen, pointing at the volatile climb of an obscure asset. Leo watched the man's hand shake slightly. The promise of an overnight fortune hung in the air, loud and demanding. Leo looked at the phone, then back at his friend. He shook his head. "No," he said, his voice flat and final. The friend scoffed, sliding the phone back into his pocket, clearly frustrated by the lack of participation. Leo did not argue or offer an explanation. He reached into his bag and pulled out a thick volume on economic history. He placed it firmly on the table, creating a barrier between them. He opened it to his place, the paper crinkling in the quiet space. He began to read, his attention shifting entirely to the page, effectively ending the conversation. He turned the leaf, focused on the steady, long-term lessons of the past. leaving the frantic gamble behind. Seasons turned into years, measured not by calendars but by the slow, rhythmic accumulation of pages read and assets held. Leo watched from his desk as the office churned through a revolving door of trends. One year it was digital tokens, the next it was speculative tech, then a sudden shift into volatile commodities. His colleagues chased every spike, their voices rising and falling with the market, their eyes constantly darting toward flashing screens. They grew thin with the stress of the chase, their desks cluttered with half-finished work and frantic notes. Leo did none of this. He stayed in the same seat, refining his focus, his own bank account growing with a dull, steady consistency that lacked the excitement of a gamble. He avoided the debt that seemed to anchor his peers to their cubicles. He ignored the frantic water cooler debates about the latest bubble. He spent his evenings not in the glow of a ticker, but in the quiet light of his growing library. He was a ghost in the machine of the industry, moving sideways while everyone else ran in circles. He did not win big in a single day, but he did not lose. He simply endured, his patience becoming a physical weight that kept him grounded while the world around him drifted into chaos. The news broke on a Tuesday. It arrived not with a shout, but with the sudden, sharp silence of 100 panicked phone calls echoing through the office. The market had corrected, and for those who had leveraged their future on speculative trends, the floor vanished. Leo stood by his window as the city below seemed to stutter. He watched the streetlights flicker, a physical ripple of the economic collapse moving through the district. Colleagues who had spent years chasing the latest bubble sat at their desks, their screens showing red, their hands trembling as they realized their debt far outweighed their assets. Leo walked out onto his balcony. The air was cool and still. He looked down at the grid of the city, at the cars stalled in traffic and the people rushing toward the subway, all caught in the wake of the crash. He checked his own position. No margins, no debt, no reliance on the volatile spikes that had just shattered everyone else. He stood in the quiet, his weight balanced, his surroundings fixed. The chaos below was a storm he had no part in. He turned back toward his room, his footsteps steady on the concrete. He was immune to the panic because he had built his foundation on a bedrock of patience, not on the shifting sand of the ticker tape. The city remained in a state of paralysis, yet Leo felt the weight lift from his shoulders. He walked back inside, away from the balcony railing, and picked up his phone. A message blinked on the screen from an old associate, detailing a sudden eviction notice and a desperate need for bridge funding. Months ago, this request would have been a calculation of risk and potential loss. Now, it was a simple matter of logistics. Leo tapped a few commands into his terminal, shifting funds that had sat untouched for years. The transaction cleared in seconds. He watched the confirmation light blink, then stood up and moved to a shelf to retrieve a heavy volume he had been meaning to finish. The urgency that defined the lives of his peers, the need to watch the ticker, the need to scramble for safety was entirely absent from his room. He walked to the window again, watching a courier deliver a package to the building across the street. He had the time to observe the movement of the city because he was no longer a slave to its frantic velocity. He opened the book, the pages crisp and dense with centuries of recorded experience. He realized then that the true dividend of his patience was not the digits on a screen, but the quiet, immovable freedom to exist on his own terms and the space to pull others out of the current. Leo turned away from the window and faced the wall that spanned the length of his study. It was a grid of leather, cloth, and paper stretching from floor to ceiling. Hundreds of volumes, each one a testament to an hour stolen from the noise of the world. He reached out and let his hand glide across the spines. He felt the texture of the binding, the subtle variations in height, the history held within the ink. He pulled a heavy, worn volume from the second row and opened it to a random page. The words were familiar, yet they carried a different weight tonight. He looked back at the rows of books, then down at his own hands. For years, he had treated the pursuit of wealth as a separate goal, a mountain to be climbed. Now, standing in the silence of his library, he saw the truth. The money in the bank, the lack of debt, the security he felt during the crash. These were not the primary achievements. They were merely the peripheral artifacts of a long, deliberate process. He had not just built a portfolio, he had built a person. The discipline required to read these pages, to weigh these ideas, and to resist the frantic pull of the market had forged his character. His wealth was a byproduct, a secondary effect of the man he had forced himself to become. Leo rested the book on his lap, the weight of the paper grounding him in the present moment. He did not rush to the next chapter. He let his eyes linger on the text, allowing the sequence of ideas to settle into his mind. The room was still, save for the faint sound of his own steady breathing. He looked at his reflection in the dark glass of the window, seeing not a younger man chasing trends, but someone who had weathered the decades with intent. He ran his thumb across the edge of the page. The habit of consistent, daily progress was etched into his posture. It was visible in the way he held his shoulders, in the lack of tension in his jaw, and in the deliberate, slow movement of his hand. He thought back to the flashing screens and the frantic noise of the market, now reduced to a distant, irrelevant hum. A smile touched his lips. It was not a grand, theatrical gesture, but a small, quiet shift in his expression. It was the look of a man who understood that his life was the sum of his smallest, most disciplined choices. The compounding effect was no longer a theory. It was the peace he felt in his chest. He was content. He was entirely, unshakably present. Leo gently closed the book, the soft thud of the cover echoing in the quiet study. He stood up, his movements fluid and unhurried. He placed the book back onto the shelf, aligning it perfectly with the others, a final act of order before the day concluded. He walked across the room, his feet silent on the floorboards. He paused for a moment by the desk, touching the smooth surface of the wood where he had spent years sharpening his mind. Everything in this space served a purpose, and everything here was a result of the patience he had nurtured. He reached for the lamp, his fingers finding the switch with practiced ease. The room dimmed, the shadows stretching across the rows of books until the vibrant colors of the spines faded into the deep gray of the night. He did not feel the need to rush toward tomorrow. He had learned that progress was not a sprint, but a steady, rhythmic walk. He turned the final switch, and the light vanished, leaving the room in peaceful silence. He walked toward the bedroom, ready for the rest that would fuel another cycle of deliberate effort. There was no anxiety, only the quiet certainty of a life built on a solid, unwavering foundation. He was ready for the next day, and the day after that, moving forward with the same steady, patient grace that had defined his journey.